The administrative divisions of the Galactic Concordat cataloged almost 1,500 space-traveling species, each meticulously classified by their technological progress, military strength, and importance in diplomacy. Humans were listed on page 738, Section D, subsection, Emergent Species of Moderate Concern, a designation that would later be considered the most humorous administrative mistake since the Zorro incident, an event where a misplaced decimal point mistakenly categorized the galaxy's most peaceful herbivores as extremely aggressive warmongers. Another splendid assembly of the galaxy's elite, the Concordat's chief ambassador, a tall, slender being whose species communicated mainly through sarcasm, drawled. Nothing exemplifies peaceful collaboration quite like 17 species that have, at one time or another, attempted to eradicate each other. The Proxima Grand Hall was teeming with representatives from all across known space. A medley of translation devices struggled to be heard over the general hubbub of hundreds of varied respiratory systems. Anti-gravity platforms floated by, carrying refreshments specifically tailored to each species' biological makeup, labeled with warnings such as "Caution, fatal to carbon-based life," and "contains nuts and time-altering spores." Among the delegates, one figure was particularly noticeable, mainly because he demanded it. Kranar, the supreme battle commander of the Vraxian Empire, dominated the hall's center, his enormous crimson form overshadowing the assembled dignitaries. Centuries of genetic modification had perfected the Vraxian warrior caste, resulting in Kranar. 9 feet of muscle, bone plating, and a temperament that made black holes appear friendly and welcoming. "These treaty discussions are tedious," Kranar declared to a group of apprehensive diplomats. "On my homeworld, we resolve territorial disagreements through battle, not dialogue." He flexed all 4 of his arms simultaneously, prompting several nearby representatives to flinch. The movement sent ripples through his ceremonial armor, intentionally designed to display the hundreds of kill notches engraved on its surface. "How delightfully archaic," a bioluminescent Kordaxian murmured. "Perhaps we should all simply strike rocks together and grunt." "What was that?" Kranar's head swiveled, enhanced auditory organs detecting the comment. "An observation on the fascinating array of conflict resolution approaches," the Kordaxian backpedaled, its lights flickering in patterns suggesting extreme unease. At the hall's far end, almost obscured between 2 floating crystal meditation spheres holding slumbering ethereal representatives, stood the human delegate. If Kranar was a supernova demanding attention, the human was a brown dwarf. Unpretentious, easily overlooked, but possessing surprising density. "Human designation, ambassador approaching Vraxian delegation," a protocol droid informed its Melnarian master. "Probability of a diplomatic incident, 63.7%. "Only that low?" the Melnarian scoffed. "Must be a new calculation model." The human wore standard diplomatic clothing, a dark suit, minimal embellishments, with the only distinctive feature being a small silver pin shaped like a 5-pointed star with a blue stone at its center. Their expression was pleasantly neutral as they moved through the crowded hall, nodding respectfully to different representatives. "Ah, the Earth representative graces us with their presence," Kranar's voice boomed, drawing everyone's attention to the approaching human. "Tell me, how does it feel to represent a species whose greatest achievement was the discovery of fire a mere millisecond ago in galactic terms?" The human smiled, a gesture that somehow managed to both recognize Kranar's insult and simultaneously dismiss it. "Commander Kranar, always a pleasure. I trust you've made a full recovery from the Regalian negotiations. I heard the medical teams performed miracles restoring function to your lower left arm." A wave of amusement rippled through the gathered representatives. The Regalian incident, where Kranar had dramatically stormed out only to slip on ceremonial oil and dislocate his arm, was a favorite piece of diplomatic gossip. Kranar's secondary heart rate accelerated, a biological tell that the Vraxians had never managed to eliminate from their warriors. "The human has jokes," he growled. "Perhaps during these negotiations we'll discover if your species possesses anything of actual value beyond your amusing attempts at diplomacy." "We do make excellent coffee," the human offered, "and we've brought plenty to share. You might find it helps with concentration during the longer sessions." The comment landed like a feather-wrapped stone. Soft delivery, solid impact, referencing the notoriously short Vraxian attention span during non-combat activities. Before Kranar could reply, the Concordat's announcement system activated, its melodic chimes signaling the imminent start of proceedings. All delegates, please proceed to your designated areas. The summit of 17 nations will commence in 5 standard units. As representatives began moving toward the council chamber, an observer might have noticed something peculiar. Despite the humans' seeming insignificance compared to the towering Vraxian, several species changed their paths to avoid passing between them, as if acknowledging an invisible line of tension that would be unwise to cross. The council chamber itself was a marvel of xeno-architecture. Each section was customized for vastly different physiologies, hovering platforms for gaseous entities, liquid tanks for aquatic species, and gravity-adjusted seating for everything in between. The human took their place at a simple table, accompanied only by a small translator drone, while Kranar settled into a reinforced platform surrounded by aides and military advisors. "Notice anything unusual?" the human murmured to their drone. "Processing." The drone's sensors scanned the room. "Anomaly detected. Arcturian delegation positioned adjacent to Vraxian contingent. Historical data indicates a 97.3% probability of confrontational positioning." "Exactly." The human nodded slightly. "They're normally across the chamber from each other. Something's changed." The session began with the traditional invocation of the Concordance Principles, a ceremony most delegates used as an opportunity to arrange notes, check messages, or in some cases, enter a state of light hibernation. When the floor opened for new business, Kranar rose to his impressive height. The chamber's acoustic system automatically adjusted to accommodate his resonant frequency. "The Vraxian Empire brings serious concerns to this council," he announced. "Our intelligence networks have detected increased piracy and unauthorized military actions in the Cygnus Arm. As the foremost military power in the quadrant, we propose a joint security initiative under Vraxian leadership." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, some expressing concern, others skepticism. The Vraxian protection racket was a poorly concealed expansion strategy that had already consumed 3 sectors. The human representative caught the attention of the session moderator, an AI construct, manifested as a geometric hologram at the chamber's center. "The delegate from Earth is recognized," the moderator announced. The human stood and, despite their average stature, somehow commanded the room's attention. "We thank the Supreme Commander for his concern regarding security in the Cygnus Arm. In the spirit of informed decision-making, Earth has prepared a comprehensive analysis of shipping routes and incident reports from the past standard year." With a subtle gesture, the human activated the chamber's holographic system. A detailed star map materialized above the central platform, with incident markers clustered in specific patterns. "As the Council can see," the human continued, "the reported attacks show a curious distribution. They appear exclusively along routes that rejected Vraxian security contracts, while completely avoiding nearby shipping lanes that accepted Vraxian terms." The implications were clear, hanging in the air like a charge building before a lightning strike. Kranar's expression darkened. "You dare accuse the Vraxian Empire of—" "I'm simply presenting data," the human interrupted smoothly. "The conquered deserves a complete picture before committing resources. Perhaps Commander Kranar would care to share the Empire's intelligence to provide additional context?" It was a perfect trap, diplomatic, reasonable, and impossible to refuse without appearing suspicious. Several council members leaned forward, suddenly much more interested in the proceedings. "Our intelligence methods are classified," Kranar growled, his claws leaving indentations in the reinforced council table. "Of course," the human nodded understandingly. "Then perhaps we could commission an independent investigation? The Concordat Security Council has protocols for precisely this situation." A muscle twitched beneath Kranar's facial plate, the Vraxian equivalent of a grimace. The human had outmaneuvered him without raising their voice or making a single direct accusation. "The Empire would welcome any investigation," Kranar finally responded, the words clearly painful. "We have nothing to hide." As the session moved to other matters, the human sat quietly, making occasional notes on a small datapad. Their translator drone hovered silently nearby. "You have made a formidable enemy today," the drone observed on a private channel. The human glanced across the chamber where Kranar was engaged in intense conversation with the Arcturian delegation head, both occasionally looking toward the Earth representative. "Not necessarily an enemy," the human replied quietly. "Warriors like Kranar understand direct confrontation. It's the ones plotting in the shadows we need to worry about." "Clarify," requested the drone. "Notice how the Arcturian ambassador keeps touching his ceremonial sash? That's their signal for a private alliance negotiation. Something bigger is happening here than border disputes." The drone's processing lights flickered. "Warning, insufficient data for comprehensive threat assessment." The human's fingers brushed against the silver star pin. "That's why we're here, to get that data before it's too late." Across the chamber, Kranar watched the human representative with renewed intensity. 300 successful campaigns had taught him to recognize worthy adversaries, regardless of their physical stature. The human had revealed themselves as one today, and in Vraxian culture, such opponents deserved special attention, the kind of attention that typically ended with one party's ceremonial blade collecting a new trophy. The second day of negotiations began with all the excitement of observing paint dry in zero gravity, a process that, contrary to popular belief, is not made more interesting by the absence of gravitational forces. Various delegates droned on about resource allocation treaties, while others pretended to listen. Their attention actually focused on whatever entertainment their neural implants could discreetly provide. "And so, in conclusion," the Melnarian trade representative stated, "we propose a 17.3% reduction in tariffs on non-sentient protein exports, with a corresponding adjustment to the biological containment protocols. That would—" "Fascinating," interrupted Kranar, rising to his full height. The chamber's lighting system cast dramatic shadows across his scarred face, an effect the Vraxians had specifically requested during the renovation of the council chambers. "But perhaps we could address matters of actual consequence, rather than spending another rotation discussing the proper taxation of glorified food paste." The Melnarian representative's translucent skin flushed a deep indigo, the species equivalent of embarrassment mixed with indignation. "Resource distribution is the foundation of interstellar stability. Just because the Vraxian solution to every economic challenge is conquer more planets doesn't invalidate." "The foundation of stability is strength," Kranar countered, slamming one massive fist against his chest plate with a resonant boom. "While the rest of you debate percentages, real threats grow at our borders. The Cygnus situation worsens daily, and yet we waste time on trivialities." The human representative leaned forward slightly, their expression thoughtful. Unlike most delegates who either cowered from or bristled at Kranar's outbursts, they seemed to be studying him with almost clinical interest. "Perhaps," the council moderator suggested, its holographic form shifting through calming color patterns, "we should address Commander Kranar's security concerns directly, as they appear most pressing to the Vraxian delegation." A ripple of resigned agreement passed through the chamber. The unofficial protocol of Concordat meetings had long been established. When the largest predator in the room grows restless, change the topic. "The floor recognizes Supreme Commander Kranar," the moderator announced. With a triumphant snort, Kranar activated the central display. A star map materialized, highlighting a sector near the border of Vraxian space. "The situation has deteriorated," he growled. "Pirates now target civilian transports. 3 freighters lost in the past lunar cycle alone. The Vraxian Empire demands action, specifically authorization for our fleet to establish permanent patrol routes through these regions." He gestured to corridors that, not coincidentally, would give Vraxian forces access to several resource-rich systems claimed by smaller powers. "A moment for clarification," came a quiet voice. All eyes turned to the human representative, who had activated their speaker without fanfare. "These attacks, do we have verification from neutral sources?" Kranar's upper lip curled. "The word of the Vraxian Empire is verification enough." "Of course," the human nodded respectfully. "However, standard concordant protocols require independent confirmation before military authorization." Perhaps we could dispatch observer vessels to... While you dispatch observers, people die, Kranar snarled. Is this the famous human compassion we hear so much about? Bureaucracy while innocents suffer? The human remained unruffled. Actually, we've taken the liberty of compiling incident reports from multiple sources. With a gesture, they overlaid new data on Kranar's map. Interestingly, our analysis shows no confirmed attacks in the regions you've highlighted, only in sectors where the Arcturian Mining Consortium recently established operations directly competing with Vraxian interests. The chamber went silent. The human had just publicly connected dots that formed a damning picture. Vraxians potentially fabricating attacks to justify military movements against economic rivals. The Arcturian ambassador, a spindly figure with iridescent eyes that occupied nearly half its face, shifted uncomfortably. The Arcturian Consortium operates only in legally recognized territories, following all established protocols. No one suggested otherwise, the human replied smoothly. I merely find the correlation statistically interesting. Kranar's massive frame vibrated with barely contained rage. His secondary respiratory vents flared, a biological warning sign that experienced diplomats recognized immediately. Several nearby delegates subtly adjusted their positions to create distance. The human representative questions Vraxian honor, Kranar rumbled, each word deliberate and heavy. Perhaps they forget who they address. I am Kranar, conqueror of the real expanse, victor of 300 death duels, bearer of the Crimson Blade. When I speak of threats, all species would be wise to listen. The human nodded acknowledgement. An impressive record, Commander. Earth respects martial prowess. We simply believe verification benefits everyone. Perhaps a joint Vraxian Concordat security force? This would provide the protection you advocate while adhering to treaty obligations. It was a perfect diplomatic counter, acknowledging Kranar's concern while proposing a solution that would prevent unilateral Vraxian military expansion. Several council members nodded approval. Kranar's eyes narrowed to slits. The human had outmaneuvered him again, offering a reasonable alternative that he couldn't reject without revealing ulterior motives. The Vraxian delegation requires consultation time, he finally growled. We will consider this compromise. As the council moved to other matters, tension remained thick in the chamber. The human representative made notes on their datapad, seemingly oblivious to the murderous glare Kranar directed at them from across the room. Probability of physical confrontation increasing, whispered the translator drone, hovering near the human's shoulder. Recommend enhanced security protocols. Noted, the human murmured, but unnecessary. Kranar won't violate diplomatic protocols. He values his reputation too much. Assessment incomplete, the drone insisted. Vraxian physiological indicators suggest extreme agitation beyond normal parameters. The human glanced up briefly. He's a warrior forced to play politician. Of course he's agitated. During the midday recess, delegates dispersed throughout the complex, forming the ever-shifting alliances and sub-alliances that characterized interstellar politics. The human representative found themselves in one of the smaller atrium gardens, a space designed to accommodate the psychological need many species had for simulated natural environments. Impressive maneuvering in there, came a melodious voice. The Zenthari ambassador, a being composed of interlocking crystalline structures that refracted light in hypnotic patterns, approached along the garden path. You've managed to corner the most dangerous predator in the quadrant without drawing your own blood. Yet, the human smiled. Just doing my job, Ambassador. Earth believes in the Concordat's mission. Noble, the crystal being chimed, its facets shifting to indicate amusement, and perhaps a touch naive. Kranar doesn't forgive perceived slights. In 3 centuries, he's never left an opponent standing. We're diplomats, not opponents, the human pointed out. Are you really that unfamiliar with Vraxian culture? The crystalline ambassador's structures realigned in a pattern denoting concern. The moment you challenged his statement publicly, you became his opponent in their worldview. There is no separation between the personal and political for its kind. Before the human could respond, a shadow fell across the garden path. Kranar stood blocking the way, his massive form even more imposing in the confined space. Two Vraxian guards flanked him, their hands resting conspicuously on ceremonial but very functional weapons. "Leave us," Kranar ordered the Zenthari ambassador, who complied with remarkable speed for a crystalline entity, chiming a hasty farewell. The humans stood their ground, maintaining a diplomatic smile. "Commander Kranar, enjoying the botanical specimens? This section features adaptive plants from 17 different ecosystems." "I care nothing for plants," Kranar growled, stepping closer. "I came to understand my opponent better." "As I mentioned to the Zenthari ambassador, we're not opponents, Commander. We're colleagues, working toward galactic stability." Kranar made a dismissive gesture with one of his secondary arms. "You manipulate words like a skilled duelist manipulates a blade. But words are not reality. Reality is strength, power, dominance. Your species lacks all three, yet you position yourself as equals." "Different strengths for different species," the human replied. "The Concordant works because we each contribute our unique capabilities." "Platitudes," Kranar snorted. "What does humanity contribute beyond diplomatic interference? Your military is negligible, your territory minimal, your technology borrowed." "We're quite good at making connections," the human offered. "Seeing patterns where others might miss them, like the interesting pattern of Vraxian fleet movements, coinciding with Arcturian mining claims." Kranar's facial plates shifted, the Vraxian equivalent of a dangerous smile. "You investigate matters that don't concern your species, a dangerous habit. When peace is threatened, it concerns all species." "Peace," Kranar repeated the word as if it tasted unpleasant. "Your species waves this concept like a religious symbol. Tell me, human, what has peace ever built?" "The Vraxian Empire expanded through strength and combat, as nature intended. The strongest survive, the weakest perish or serve. That is the only truth in this universe." The human touched the silver star pin on their lapel, a subtle gesture that didn't escape Kranar's notice. "What is that insignia?" he demanded. "You touch it when you seek confidence." "It's a memorial," the human answered simply, "for a friend." "Ah," Kranar's tone became mockingly sympathetic. "A fallen warrior, perhaps? Someone who died gloriously in battle?" A shadow passed over the human's face, brief but noticeable. "A colleague, they died helping evacuate civilians during the Proxima incident." Kranar laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "So, not even a warrior's death. A servant's end, shuffling the weak to safety instead of facing enemies. And you honor this?" The human's expression didn't change, but something shifted in their posture, a subtle squaring of the shoulders, a minute hardening around the eyes. "They saved 1,700 civilians," the human said quietly, "including children. And accomplished nothing of actual value," Kranar dismissed with a wave. "Vraxians understand true honor. Your friend died a meaningless death, protecting those too weak to protect themselves. On my world, we would not even record such a name in our histories." The garden fell silent. Even the ambient sounds of the environmental system seemed to fade away. The two Vraxian guards exchanged glances, their body language registering surprise at their commander's unusually pointed insult. "I see," the human said after a moment, their voice perfectly level. "Thank you for sharing your perspective, Commander." Kranar, perhaps expecting an emotional outburst, seemed almost disappointed by the measured response. "You return to your diplomatic shields. Typical human weakness." "Not at all," the human replied, looking directly into Kranar's eyes. "I'm simply processing the information you've provided about Vraxian values. It's illuminating." Something in the human's tone, a certain flatness, an absence of their previous diplomatic warmth, caused Kranar to reassess the interaction. For a fleeting moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. "The afternoon session begins soon," the human continued. "If you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make." They gave a perfectly correct diplomatic bow, exactly deep enough to show appropriate respect to Kranar's rank, but not a millimeter deeper. As the human walked away, Kranar's senior guard leaned toward him. "Commander, that was uncharacteristically personal, even for diplomatic intimidation." The human needed to understand their place, Kranar replied, but there was a note of defensiveness in his voice. Of course, Commander, but insulting their honored dead might be considered excessive by Concordat standards. Kranar dismissed the concern with a gesture. What will they do? File a complaint? Humans are soft creatures who hide behind procedure and politeness. The guard hesitated. The translator picked up a micro-expression when you spoke of their friend. Their pupil dilation and subtle pheromone shift suggests... Suggests what? Kranar demanded. Among predator species, it would indicate transition to hunting mode, the guard admitted reluctantly. Kranar stared after the departing human, then laughed. You give them too much credit. They're barely more than talking primates. Their evolutionary psychology is transparent. They'll retreat into their diplomatic procedures and file strongly worded protests. As you say, Commander, the guard conceded, though uncertainty lingered in its tone. When the council reconvened, attendees noticed something different about the human representative. Though their behavior remained impeccably professional, the easy diplomatic smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of focused intensity. They spoke only when necessary, their interventions precise and technical rather than persuasive. The Zenthari ambassador, whose species was particularly sensitive to behavioral shifts, leaned toward the Melnarian representative. Something has changed with the human. How can you tell? The Melnarian whispered back. They all look the same to me. Not appearance, energy. Before, they radiated diplomatic accommodation. Now, the crystal being's facets shifted to a concerned configuration. Now, they radiate purpose. As the session concluded, delegates filed out of the chamber. The human representative remained seated, making notes on their datapad. Kranar, surrounded by his entourage, paused at the chamber exit, glancing back at the solitary figure. For reasons he couldn't quite articulate, the supreme battle commander of the Vraxian Empire, conqueror of 17 star systems, and veteran of 3 centuries of warfare, felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping along his spine. The closest human equivalent would be the feeling of being watched by a predator in the dark. News travels faster than light in diplomatic circles, not through any violation of physics, but through the universe's most efficient information network, gossip. By morning, every delegate knew of Kranar's insult and the human's uncharacteristic silence afterward. The council chamber buzzed with anticipation as delegates filed in, conversations dropping to hushed tones when the human representative entered. They walked directly to the central speaking platform, rather than their assigned seat, their expression unnervingly calm. Point of personal privilege, the human announced, activating the chamber's formal protocol system. The moderator's holographic form pulsed in acknowledgement. The delegate from Earth is recognized, it intoned. I invoke Article 17 of the Concordat Charter, the human stated clearly, the right of cultural resolution. A wave of astonishment swept through the chamber. Article 17 was rarely invoked, a provision allowing delegates to resolve personal disputes according to their own cultural traditions, outside normal diplomatic channels. Kranar entered the chamber, freezing momentarily when he saw the human at the central platform. His guards exchanged concerned glances. Specify the nature of the dispute and requested resolution method, the moderator requested. Yesterday, Supreme Commander Kranar of the Vraxian Empire publicly dishonored the memory of a fallen Earth representative, the human replied. As is my right under Concordat law, I request resolution through traditional Vraxian honor combat. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates stood. Translator drones strained to keep up with the sudden flood of exclamations, and the Vraxian delegation looked genuinely shocked. Order! The moderator's voice cut through the din. Commander Kranar, do you acknowledge this challenge? All eyes turned to the Vraxian. Refusing would violate his culture's most sacred traditions, but accepting meant fighting a physically inferior opponent, potentially causing a diplomatic catastrophe if the human were killed. I acknowledge, Kranar finally growled, but I remind the human that Vraxian combat traditionally ends in death. I'm aware, the human replied evenly. I've studied your traditions extensively. The challenge party may set conditions for non-lethal resolution. Kranar's eyes narrowed. The human had outmaneuvered him again, demonstrating knowledge of Vraxian customs while providing him a face-saving option. First blood or submission, Kranar declared. Combat will take place in the Concordat's neutral arena. Acceptable, the human nodded. Standard preparation period of 1 rotation. As the chamber slowly emptied, delegates whispered frantically about the unprecedented challenge. The Zenthari ambassador approached the human representative. This is suicide, the crystalline being chimed urgently. Kranar has never lost combat. Not once in 3 centuries. The human touched the silver star pin. My friend was a combat instructor, the finest Earth produced. And you, their student? The human's expression softened slightly. They taught me that strength comes in many forms. Kranar never understood that lesson. Understanding won't matter when he tears you apart, the Zenthari warned. The human merely nodded. Perhaps, but some principles are worth the risk. As they walked away, the Zenthari noticed something it hadn't before. The way the human moved, with a balanced efficiency that seemed somehow familiar. It took a moment before recognition dawned. It was exactly how predator species moved when conserving energy before a hunt. The Concordat's neutral arena, originally designed for ceremonial performances, had been hastily reconfigured for combat. Delegates from every species packed the observation rings, a rare display of unified interest among the otherwise fractious assembly. Kranar entered first, his crimson form gleaming with ritual oils, carrying only the single blade permitted by the combat protocols. His confidence radiated like heat as he performed the traditional Vraxian war salute, to appreciative murmurs. When the human entered, the chamber fell silent. Gone was the diplomatic attire, replaced by a simple black combat suit. They carried no visible weapons. This will be brief, Kranar announced to the crowd. The human shows courage. Remember that when they fall. The human said nothing, merely touching the silver star pin, now affixed to their combat suit, before moving to the starting position. Combat began with the traditional gong. Kranar lunged with frightening speed, blade arcing toward the human, who impossibly wasn't there anymore. What followed defied expectations. The human moved with preternatural awareness, always just beyond Kran's reach. They didn't attack. They simply weren't where Kranar's strikes landed. Fight me! Kranar roared in frustration after a dozen failed attacks. I am, the human replied calmly. My friend taught me Vraxian physiology has a critical flaw. Your species evolved for strength, not endurance. Understanding dawned in Kranar's eyes as his secondary respiratory system engaged, the first sign of Vraxian fatigue. 3 minutes later, when Kranar's movement slowed fractionally, the human struck not with strength, but with precision, targeting nerve clusters that Vraxian armor couldn't protect. Kranar collapsed, paralyzed but conscious, his own blade now at his throat. Yield, the human said quietly. How? Kranar gasped. My friend didn't die saving the weak, the human explained. They died saving future warriors, scientists, and diplomats, including the one who taught me how to defeat you. The legend of Kranar didn't end that day. It simply acquired an unexpected final chapter 1 that the galaxy's diplomats would whisper for generations. Never insult a human's dead.